I want to look back over the past few months of this show because all of the dots are now connecting. Remember the global pandemic war game that we told you about on the episode Event 201? This was a war game where business leaders, medical professionals, and government officials at the highest levels met in New York to run a simulation of what might happen if the world got this, a coronavirus. What happens if it was unleashed on the world? Well, that happened last October 2019, 4 months before the actual coronavirus cases began popping up in China. Kind of sounds a little relevant, doesn't it? But the media didn't want anyone to talk about it. It's all out online. You can watch it. They predicted in that conference before coronavirus was unleashed in China that 65 million people would be dead in the end. 65 million. Something would have to change, and an overriding theme was clear amongst the attendees.
The scenario also highlights the very critical role that global business and public-private partnerships play in preparing for and responding to pandemics.
And we know from past responses that public-private cooperation will be essential.
We're at the start of what's looking like it will be a severe pandemic. And there are problems emerging that can only be solved by global business and governments working together.
Okay, public-private partnership, something we've grown accustomed to, but we shouldn't have. It's the merging of private business with the government. And it's big business. It's not the business down the street. It's big business. I told you how the dots are being connected. I want you to look on who put this little war game on. It was Johns Hopkins University, Bill and Melinda Gates, and something called the World Economic Forum. We're going to come back to them in just a minute. In another previous segment, I showed you that the UN's plan for global socialism was masked under the fight against climate change. I told you they were very good at marketing, Agenda 21. We exposed that, and it had to be rebranded into Agenda 2030. And then everybody stopped talking about it. It's all about one thing, and that is control. They established 17 sustainable development goals to provide, quote, a shared blueprint for peace and prosperity for the people and the planet now and in the future. They go on, quote, ending poverty and other deprivations must go hand in hand with strategies that improve health and education, reduce inequality, and spur economic growth, all while tackling climate change and working to preserve our oceans and forests. This all sounds great by itself, except it's a utopia, and if we're all forced into it by a government, it's a communist utopia. Oh, yeah, and those countries and those systems will never, ever protect an environment. Agenda 2030 is actually all about inventory and control. How many people are there? Where do they live? How do they move? Do they live in cities that they control? The Sustainable Development Goal 11 talks about, quote, integrated and sustainable human settlement planning and management with a, quote, ratio of land consumption rate to population growth rate. You see, to Agenda 2030, people are a disease. They need to be taken out of rural areas and herded into cities. I wish I had more time to go through all of this, but there are several books that we wrote on it and several shows we dedicated. But there is a reason you might have noticed that farmland is being claimed by eminent domain in states all over the country. Government control of private business is the ultimate goal. You'll notice the Fed is bailing out all of the big corporations, but all of the American entrepreneurs are being slaughtered right now in this pandemic. In some circles, it's called National Socialism, what's going on. I use that phrase and I'm going to use it again. I don't want you to get stuck on National Socialism. I don't know what to call this. They won't call it National Socialism. It's not exactly communism. It's not exactly National Socialism, but it's the closest to that. It's authoritarianism, global control. Now, where have we heard National Socialism before? Well, usually by the genocidal psychopaths with very small mustaches. Back in April, I showed you how the economic recession that we're now in was something that we've never seen before. because it was done to us on purpose. It was all handed to the president, already packaged as a plan. It wasn't a question of if the coronavirus shutdown was going to put us into recession. Recession was the plan. This from the CEO and the 12th president of the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, James Bullard. Quote, "This is a planned, organized, partial shutdown of the U.S. economy. We are throttling back output on purposes to meet health guidelines, transfer income to affected households, call it pandemic relief, get transfers to the businesses that are affected heavily, and come out on the other side. Identical economy. Produce the same goods as before." But that's really not what is going on. And it sounds nice, but there was another agenda. Our economy and our banking system was collapsing. This is a reset. And they threw the obscene virus fatality and economic numbers at us to scare everyone into compliance. The Fed said that the unemployment rate by June would be 32%. Now, let's put that into perspective. 32% unemployment is 3 times higher than what you and I experienced in the Great Recession and higher than what our great-grandparents and grandparents experienced in the Great Depression. Well, the numbers for June have now come out. Was the Fed correct? Well, the unemployment rate is 11.1 and going down, so they missed it by a factor of 3. Does the Fed just suck? Spoiler alert, they do, but is there something else going on here? The sensationalizing has not stopped. A couple of weeks ago, it was reported that the U.S. economy suffered its worst plunge ever with a decline of 32.9% in the second quarter. Well, that is much worse than the Great Depression. The Biden campaign then used that to show how badly Donald Trump was handling the crisis. Quote, the depth of economic devastation our nation is experiencing is not an act of God. It's a failure of presidential leadership. Well, maybe that would be true if the number was true, but the number is not true. Like all of the sensationalized unemployment figures from the Fed, the GDP number was distorted. The real number is 9.5, and everybody who knows anything knew it. 32.9 is the annual, meaning the GDP would have to decline by the current rate for 4 straight quarters. We were only talking about 1. We're actually doing better than countries in Europe. Germany's second quarter decline was over 10%. So what's going on? Why the trickery? Well, the truth is they need you to be scared. They need you to be freaked out by the pandemic. They needed it to be worse. They need the economy to be worse. Everything they need, they need to get Donald Trump out of there because they're about to usher in a new era. Biden claimed that the president's policies have caused the crisis, but the Trump advocacy for reopening the economy is the exact reason we don't have 32% unemployment and a 32% decline in GDP. They frightened the country into compliance, and now they're beating us over the head if we dare step out of line. And simultaneously, as people began to freely give up their constitutional rights, a wave of civil unrest spread all over the country. We've been exposing the rioting, not the protests, the rioting for weeks now. Everyone from Marxist leadership of Black Lives Matter, the 60s era radicals that helped them, and their alliance with both Islamists and anarchists like Antifa, the usual suspects have all been identified, including spooky dude George Soros. Now, the world economic experts told us that everything would be okay if we just all agreed to ridiculously cut our wrists and bleed in the tub. They said that a V-shaped economic plan would happen and we would dive down and then they'd turn it back on and we'd go back up in 6 weeks. The economy would take that nosedive, but then we would restart. It had never been tried before. Who came up with this plan? We showed you on this program. Donald Trump and a few conservative governors are trying to make this happen, but guess who's not happy about restarting the engine? The Fed said this Monday that we have to put the brakes on and shut everything back down. I kid you not. The Fed wants the economic doomsday numbers to come true. Why? Because restarting was never the plan. A great reset is what they planned.